shout outs, I guess. The Bitcoin Zine was mentioned in the intro. It's fun, playful Bitcoin art. You can find us on Twitter. That's my handle at Amiti. And then if you're interested in going deeper in the technology and that track, then emailing learning@chaincode.com, because they have steady groups. So that's for people who are interested in really diving deep. And now I'll open it up to Q&A.
Thanks, Amiti. Do you want me to just read you some of the questions from the chat?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So the first one is, I agree that this new trust model has the potential to transform hierarchical systems, but isn't that an argument for blockchain, not Bitcoin necessarily? So I guess that's a question about what's so special about Bitcoin.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think that generally I'm pretty supportive of like different crypto projects, but I'm pretty exclusive with my attention. And I see it as different timelines. Like Bitcoin is much, much more mature than other crypto projects, which are just popping up right now. And it just has the most well-defined premise of what exactly is it. Bitcoin is money. And lots of different crypto projects have really awesome goals. And I think the world I want to see play out has all sorts of these different use cases playing out. But there's a lot of really big questions to figure out of how do we do that? How do we do that in a way that's secure and proven to not be hackable or gameable, or that the incentives align, etc. And I see the timeline of Bitcoin playing out as multiple lifetimes, like maybe in the next 100 years kind of thing. And so for me, it's just much more like concrete and tangible. And having money's the easiest use case of this blockchain technology. It's the simplest. Some of the other projects kind of describe really what is possible with this technology. But we also need to make sure to get the first one right. We need to make sure that this works in a very contained use case. And so that's why like Bitcoin to me is much more tangible. It's here now. It's already money. It already works. It's already quite secure. But I also think it's really exciting to see like all these different use cases popping up. And I also think that there's projects that go beyond blockchain that use alternate models for like all sorts of human social coordination problems. And I think it's super exciting, but I think it's like it's kind of like something that's going in production, deployed, ready to use today versus these much more like far-reaching experimental things that are trying out some really cool premises, if that makes sense.
Completely, and some of them it's just easier to hack, and it's been done, and so there's that.
Yeah.
And the next question is, with all the institutional investment in Bitcoin right now, isn't the hierarchy that you talked about before being protected or being carried forward in some way?
Yeah, I worry about that too. Of just because we build the technology doesn't mean that we're changing things. It's how humans adopt the technology. Like I see Bitcoin as this potential for a shift in our wealth hierarchy, or a shift in like global policies, etc. But it's not inevitable by any means, and it's never going to be perfectly fair or perfectly even or anything like that, because personally I can't even like ideologically come to what perfectly fair would look like. But I think there's a lot of ways that it does level the playing field. Even if institutional investors are able to deposit, $50K, and then an ordinary individual can only do 500, they don't get this compounding effect of that like paying out over time. It remains kind of linear. And I think that's really cool, because in most systems that we have currently, you get this compounding effect where that 50K makes the $500 like irrelevant, or you even have to pay over time some sort of tax or debt or dues. So I by no means think that Bitcoin is this silver bullet that's just going to solve all the problems of human inequality. But I do think that there's a lot of potential here. And if we're able to build systems on top of a technology that minimizes trust, that distributes directly, then it's not that it's going to erase the need for Airbnb or Amazon to exist at all, but it might minimize what they're offering. Because right now they're able to, as a concrete example, they're able to profit disproportionately on that trust. And so if we minimize the trust that we put on them, then the inputs of the system are less. Like, they might still be able to profit, and it might not be perfectly fair, but there's less of that for them to skew in their favor, for example. So I think Bitcoin has a lot of potential, but I don't think any of it is inevitable.
Yeah, and to your point about the institutional investors, being able to put more money in, at least the individual investor doesn't have to go through that institution to participate. So
Yeah.
that mediation isn't there.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
Also, I think another element is that to participate in the system, it's not just like putting money in, but it's also running a node, being able to validate it, like validate that transactions are legit, that sort of thing. And that's something that we really make sure is economically accessible. I think we have a long way to go in terms of making it like socially accessible, or like it's still very intimidating to run a node. And there's a lot of work on the education layer that we have to do. But just from a financial point of view, even if you put like $10 into the system, you can run a node that makes sure the system's taking care of it the way you intended.
Yeah, that sounds great. And our next question is about mining. So as a miner, do you work in a pool? Is there like some kind of center? Do you need a lot of power behind you to win the block? Like, how realistic is it for someone to mine right now, and what resources would they need?
Yeah, so mining is something that when Bitcoin started, everybody who used Bitcoin would mine it. But at this point has become a whole industry of players that are like quite specialized. I'm not like intimately familiar with mining myself, but I do believe that the majority of miners do participate in some sort of pool. And also they use specialized equipment that's like really good at only computing SHA-256. There's nothing else. And so they use this specialized equipment to try to win blocks. And so it isn't the most accessible thing. Like, I wouldn't recommend, I mean, you can try mining on your laptop, for example, but then your fan will probably go crazy and you probably won't actually successfully make any blocks in Bitcoin right now. So yeah, but it's taken off into being a whole industry of its own, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, a lot more specialized than it was before.
Yeah, definitely.
And then our next question, I think it's a two-parter. The first was about, how is it different than the traditional models, and how do you prevent accumulation of wealth? I think like we touched on that a little bit, but if you have more to add, feel free to. And the second part is like, how do you make it easy for humanity to use Bitcoin?
That's a great question, and that's what I think about all the time, and I don't have any great solutions. Like, it's really important that people can use this tool. It doesn't matter if that tool is there if the people who need it can't use it. But how to make it accessible, like, that's harder than the technical questions that I need to answer or that I work on in the code. But also what I think is really powerful is seeing all the use cases globally where people who need it figure it out. Whether it's like protesters in Belarus that are fighting for democracy, and then the government or people like the leadership is able to cut off their bank accounts, and suddenly they never meant to use Bitcoin, but suddenly that's the only way that they can like get resources from the outside world that helps them feed and house themselves. Like this is a true story that's happening for some people today. And it's not just, again, like I don't want to just use these countries that are going through deep political turmoil as a scapegoat. Like there's all sorts of use cases that are kind of on the edge of what a government thinks is okay today. Like I heard a story of somebody in London who was trying to buy CBD for his mom because she was in pain, and apparently CBD works really well. And he had to use Bitcoin because that's not legal there. So I think that I have one more actually. When I was at a summer program, like a Bitcoin residency in New York, one of my peers there was from South Africa, and she wasn't able to open a US bank account because she didn't have a permanent proof of address. We were just like staying in an Airbnb all summer. So she wasn't able to open a bank account, so she wasn't able to get the stipend from the program that we were participating in. And it's just like pretty ordinary. There's not anything that's illegal or dubious in that situation, but because of the way that our systems are set up, where in order to get trust in this system, you need to have proof of address. So eventually she had to use Bitcoin, where she had to just like do an in-person transaction where somebody sent her Bitcoin and she like gave her residency stipend. And that was the only way she was able to get it back to South Africa. So I think that, especially now that my eyes have been open, I hear all these sorts of stories of how people who need it figure it out and use it today. I don't think that's enough. I think we have tons more work to do in terms of making sure that everybody who could benefit can use this, and in ways that are intuitive and beneficial. But it's also kind of cool to hear these stories of people around the world today.
Definitely. And you coming and talking to everyone and explaining things in such simple analogies like definitely helps, and people can be not so intimidated and maybe go and read a little bit more and run their own node and try it all out. So that's great. And the next question is, can you share the books to learn more? I think generally just if anyone has any links, just post them in the chat below. And so people can get them. And I see Manasi already did that with the books that you mentioned.
Nice, thanks.
And okay, so there's
sharing the recording after, and I'm not sure, Amiti, if you are okay with this, but if you want to share those resources or link to your presentation, we can add that alongside the recording so everyone can have access to it.
Yep, happy to. Yeah, also sharing in here, Andreas Antonopoulos, who, oops, that was a direct message. I can use a computer. Yeah, he's very eloquent on lots of introductory topics to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and very savvy. So his work is something I'd recommend for if that suits you.
Yeah, I think he was one of the first people that I like listened to a lot and read too. So, and Susan Roy asks, is Bitcoin scarce? Is there a limited supply?
Yes, absolutely. That's a crucial part of the system. There is a supply cap of 21 million, and anytime anybody who's running a Bitcoin node is validating that, that this is met. There's an emission schedule that has been predetermined since it was released every 4 years. The number of, okay, let me back up. So the way new Bitcoin come into creation are via a reward to the miners for mining a block. So they provided a service to the network, and they're incentivized to do this because they get rewarded in Bitcoin. How many Bitcoin they get is